Welcome to Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's nearly 3 months since we met. There are a few changes, so can I say a warm welcome back to Liz, and also a big warm welcome to our powerful youth spokes for the evening, Rose, and also the lovely Karen. And it's Karen's last time with us, so we're a bit sad about that. So we've bought you a little treat to remember us by, because I'm giving you it now, because I know you don't always stay till the end of the meeting, but we are going to miss you. Lucky Rivermead School is all I can say. I will still talk to you, all right. And obviously we've got new spokes for the opposition, and that's Mark. And then we've been joined on the our side by our ex-mayor, Nina, who has a lot of social work experience. And I think that's all the new people, unless I've missed anybody, but welcome to our early years and Rebecca Smith. And thank you to the top team who are looking after me this evening in the absence of Leanne and Raj. So we'll make a start then. Apologies for absence. We've got Sharon Jackson, who isn't here. She's giving out GB Plus awards because she won an award last year, so she has to give it to the person this year, otherwise she would be here. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm substituting for Kwashi. I had a premonition.
Oh, okay, so that's for Robbie. He's not here, and then and Kwasi was supposed to be here, but you've stepped in at the final hour. Thank you, Roger. Lovely to see you. Can we please check the records of the meeting, and everyone agrees I can sign every page of them? Is that agreed? Brilliant, thank you. Any urgent matters? I have none. Any from the floor? No? Okay. And disposable pecuniary interests or any other significant whipping interests? Nina.
I do need to declare that I work as member of social work team in an independent fostering agency. I work as safeguarding lead, just letting you know.
Lovely. I don't think there's any clash on the agenda tonight. Thank you.
I just need to declare that I'm a trustee of the Rochester School for Girls charity and the Sir Joseph Williamson's mathematical scheme as well.
Thank you. Anybody else? Sharon, thank you. Thank you. Can you make sure you pull your mics? I'm probably the worst one, but otherwise we're being recorded and it won't be picked up. Thank you. Okay. Right. I'm so pleased. Oh. Leah.
So because there wasn't specifically schools on there, I didn't think it was relevant, but just in case, I'm recently doing some exam invigilating at Greenacre, so just so it's transparent.
Yeah, thanks for the transparency. Okay, thank you. So, oh, it's like buses with the opposition today. Or stations. Right, who's been evicted? And it's not even that time of eviction, is it? Yeah.
So Crotchy is sub for Robbie. And Valid Roger was being sub for Crotchy.
Do you think so?
Looks like it.
Bye, Kwasi. See you soon. Okay, well, let's go on to the most powerful report I've read in a long time. I'd like to welcome our youth element, our wonderful Medway Youth Parliament, who have presented a report, and I know you've all had time to read it. So over to Rose, please.
So this was our youth conference. It happens every year, and all funds, everything is run by the Youth Council. We invite all secondary schools in Medway to attend, and we do it about a theme. This year we chose to do it on identity, particularly tackling homophobia and racism, but also looking at like disability awareness, just so that we're looking after all people in Medway and the UK. And we've got our key recommendations included.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Chair. So I have a couple of questions because I thought it was an excellent report. Thank you. And I was so pleased to see so many students attending from so many different schools. But I was also quite shocked at some of the information that was shared with us in the report. And I wanted to ask a couple of questions. So what support can be provided to improve consistent approaches to behaviour management in dealing with issues of racism, both from a council perspective, but also possibly from some of our education members of committee? Same question would apply to homophobic behaviour and religious expression. And then also in terms of how can we improve support and reduce perceived discrimination in respect to disability? Those were my key questions. And then in terms of the recommendations, what feedback from schools have we had so far on how the recommendations might be implemented?
Paula, my apologies. Brilliant questions. Could I just ask that we do one at a time in respect of our young people? Thank you.
Thank you. In regards to just like tackling like the homophobia and racism, and we were looking at actually making sure people are aware of it and the problems that surround it. Because we all know what problems there are. It's just making everyone, regardless of age, aware of what's happening and how we can change views about it. So lots of young people were saying, although it may not always be intentional, some of the stuff that people are saying towards them or the way they're acting towards them is quite impacting both mental health and just how they view other things. In response to the schools, lots of schools have had positive feedback. Lots of schools said they were going to go away and look into it and how they can how they can use the information found from there within their own schools and what difference they could make. I'm hoping that we will see some difference made over the next few weeks, months. Thank you.
Next question, Paula.
I think the question around support, perhaps if we could get that from in terms of what the council can provide in terms of support.
Celia, would that be you or Rebecca?
So I'm happy to answer, and then Rebecca can jump in if I miss anything. So we do provide support to schools around their PSHE curriculum and the education that they put through that, which is about addressing some of the issues that you've raised there. And we do know that our schools work very positively with their young people and schools councils to try and address those things. We have previously presented to this committee around some of our recording on incidents in relation to racism, etc., within schools. So we record that, which is a more detailed report in terms of how often that is happening. I don't know if Rebecca wants to add to that.
Thanks, Celia. I would just add to it in terms of schools are aware of the racial incidents reporting portal that they can very clearly record any incidents, and the support that they are receiving falls very much in line with their curriculum approach and some of those PSHE programs of which Celia has made reference to. There's some excellent support available from our colleagues for schools at every phase in relation to that particular curriculum area. And I think that the unintentional or unintended consequence is an issue that many schools are still continuing to think about within their own youth councils or school councils or whatever that might be named in their schools. But as I move around school to school, I see a really high profile on that agenda and the voice of all those pupils being really encouraged. So I'm certainly heartened that the profile of it is higher than I've ever seen it before. And I think it would sit very closely with what you're saying, Rose, as well, in terms of the report showing the evidence that we can see in schools, but the support is available to those schools to report incidents of a racist nature, and the curriculum support is also available very strongly.
Okay, as I saw them, if that's okay, I saw Smitha, Leah, Damalola, then Wayne, Mark and Adrian. Anybody else that I've missed? Sorry, George. Thank you.
Is that me, yeah? Thank you. Thank you, Rose. Excellent report. It filled me with lots of hope reading that. I'm also, like Paula said, really saddened to see the number of number of young people reporting incidents of racism and homophobia. It's really sad. But then I think if you look at our wider society, we've got this right-wing media and this really strong force in politics as well, right-wing, currently, especially in the lead up to the election, people just casually and just kind of callously throwing around racist tropes. So if that's what's shaping our conversations, that's really depressing. And I kind of feel like the young people in our state schools here in Medway have a lot more sense and a lot more values in their toenail than some of our very privileged, privately educated leaders at the moment have. So I'm quite proud of our young people and of this whole conference, the way it was delivered, designed, delivered, and all the feedback and everything that you've got from it. So that was I just wanted to say well done for that. And I really hope that the young people can change this discourse that we have in our country. In terms of the actual conference that you had, it sounds like a really fantastic event, and I'm sure all the young people who came there went away feeling quite empowered and feeling enlightened by the whole experience. I just wondered, are there schools that just don't engage with you? I know I can see there's a wide range of schools that you're working with, and that's fantastic. It's a good mix of grammar schools and, non-selective schools. But are there schools that you're just not breaking through, not for lack of you trying, but for whatever the reasons are. And I wondered what those barriers are, because I would like children from every school to be participating in this. I want young people from every school in Medway to be involved in this, to be heard, you know. So I just wondered what your views are on those barriers and how you can kind of break them down.
Yeah, thank you. So we invite every secondary school in Medway. It's often quite a struggle to actually get responses from schools. So yeah, I think there's nothing that we can do more from our side. It's actually getting schools involved, because it's something brilliant that schools can say, oh yeah, we're supporting this. So it doesn't make sense on our behalf why they're not coming, because it doesn't cost them anything as far as we're aware. So we've tried to make sure that anything that does cost comes from us. So it's just about getting the schools engaged and getting them involved with just the youth council altogether and making sure their young people's voices are heard. But, yeah, thank you.
If you think we can offer any specific support, please do let us know, because we'd be, I think, as a committee, we'd be very keen to give you that little push to make sure that everybody takes up what you're saying. And then I just have a comment. You have a lot of recommendations, resources you want schools to take away and work on, information events, information resources, e-learning and things like that. I just wonder how you chose these resources. What guidelines did you use? I can see Stonewall is listed in there. Stonewall has quoted a lot of controversy in recent years. And I feel like, again, going back to the right-wing media, people are stoking culture wars. We just have to be really careful to avoid some extreme positions when we are talking about young people and their identity. So just very gently, I just want to urge a little bit of caution when you choose resources, and I just wanted to know what your thought process was.
So when we looked at the recommendations and what we were choosing to use as resources, we were looking at mostly what we wanted young people, not young people, or even the adults to take away from it. So these are just recommendations, of course, but I think the main focus is actually educating those who are working with young people, or just everyone, about what's going on. So it may not necessarily be these resources that you use, just having those resources available, like even if we create our own resources, like the council, the youth council, anyone, that people could go and just use in order to better understand what's going on, if that makes sense. Yeah, sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Smitha. Leah.
So I had similar but slightly different comments to Paula. The first one was that I wanted to say I love you guys. I love the work that you do, and I love seeing how passionate and engaged and committed all of the young people that come here through Youth Parliament are. But I was also concerned about how many children are saying that when they report incidents of any kind of discrimination, the handling of that is inconsistent. So obviously with so many schools now being academies and not under LEA control, I know that we don't have much jurisdiction over that, but I wondered what support we can offer training staff or training staff in how to handle it, and then how can we monitor that going forward? Because I imagine that inconsistency is depending on what teacher it gets reported to or what teacher witnesses it. So I wonder on how we can try and ensure and monitor that there is consistency in a Medway-wide approach.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you did touch on it in your question, in that there's lots of legislation and response. Oh, sorry. Sorry, is that better? Sorry, you touched on it in your question. There's lots of legislation and responsibilities in schools, and the responsibility is schools to do that education of their staff, etc. And whilst we do support that development of the PSHE curriculum, we put out the latest guidance on these issues. We don't have that resource in terms of delivering training or monitoring that across the schools, and we wouldn't have any levers to encourage schools to take it up. But it's set in school statutory legislation that they need to provide this, and they need to respond to it appropriately. Sorry, just say it's not so much the providing the curriculum.
I get that that's across the board, but it's set in the schools' legislations that they have to respond to it in a consistent way when incidents occur. Okay, but we don't then get to, yeah.
Okay, can I just come back on that? So why do we think there is such a need in the reports that our powerful young people are giving us the results of then? So obviously we need to listen to the voice of our young people, and if they're saying there is such disparity, how are we going to address that in Medway is my point really.
So I think it's a good question, and that is around challenge, our challenge conversations with schools when it's fed back to us that there are issues and issues in accessing. You're right, the legislation around reporting incidents, which we monitor and log, we don't have a high number reported, and we fully accept that there is a disparity there between what is reported as an official incident and what young people in the schools are picking up. So there is some work there around actually identifying where there are issues, and then we can do that targeted intervention. I can see Rebecca's indicating at me to come in, so if I let Rebecca come in.
Thanks, Celia. Just a couple of points. Mindful that we agreed with the Medway Education Partnership Group to provide a very simple overview of the outcome of the incidents involving racial incidents that were reported. So it will be timely that we'll be presenting that to the Medway Education Partnership Group. And representation from every phase of education attends that meeting. So therefore that will be a way to highlight and raise the profile of this issue. But in addition to that, I would bring in the voice of governors in schools as well, because there is an obligation for head teachers to report to their governing body on a regular basis the number of incidents of those nature that you cover in your report, Rose, and therefore governors would be able to interrogate that a little further and ask some really clear questions of, if we know this, why do we know this, how have we responded, and what are we going to do as a result of that. So it would be very much the role of the governing body to be able to pick that up.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay. Demola.
I think my question comment sort of echoes what's already been said by Leah especially. So when it is reported, what happens next? Are parents informed? And if it happens again by maybe a certain child, what happens next? I think I'm hearing there isn't really a set process in place, which seems like that's why children feel like it's inconsistent. And I think it's also especially worrying that obviously they're sharing these details, and we know that there's an increase in suicide rates among young people. So how does that help a child if they go to school and they don't feel accepted, they don't feel safe? And Rose, again, just to say, I definitely appreciate and sympathetic towards yourselves and your peers and being able to say that. And I think it's obviously, I understand that there's a lot of we don't have much control over how that's monitored within a lot of these schools, but I think that it's important to listen and do something about it, because that's worrying.
So in terms of what happens next and informing the family, etc., that is the incident that happens in the schools, and that is down to the schools. So we don't have that information. They are required to report that log to us, and I don't know whether Rebecca wants to come in terms of what we do on that, but essentially we monitor it, and then if there are a number of incidents that cause us concern within a particular school, we can go in and have those conversations with those schools. We obviously have more levers where they are our schools as opposed to academies, but that initial response is down to individual school policy.
I would just echo that, Celia. I can think of an example where last year's returns did provide some interesting information that was part of a wider conversation with one of our secondary schools and helped to support some of the initiatives which the leadership was aiming to develop, and they found the information very helpful.
Thank you. Wayne?
Thank you very much. Evening, Rose. Love to see you here rather than on a rugby pitch, which is where I'd often see you. My question, first of all, is a good report, and thank you and everyone on the Youth Council for preparing this. And for me, when I read this, it was actually quite sad in one respect, because when Fionn, my daughter, for those that don't know, she plays rugby with Rose, when she was on the Youth Council, she faced the same kind of issues with regards to racism. And it's quite disappointing that there's been no real improvement on this over the last few years. And there is an inconsistency, and it's mentioned at 4.3 in the report, with regards to the punishment for racism, because I'm actually aware of a school within Medway who, as part of their sanctions, actually have the use of a mobile phone being more severe than racism, which I personally find absolutely disgusting and rather shocking. So there's a couple of things that I want to raise out of it, and it's, first of all, Councillor Campbell's already asked that question, is how do we get more schools involved with it? Because that's really important, because we had 104 young people respond to the documents and the questions posed, but that's a really tiny majority or number of our students. And I just wonder whether those that are in the education, so I'm looking directly at Celia on this one, whether or not there is something that we can do to really enforce within the PSHE subject that students mandatorily respond to these types of questions so that we can really hear the voice of our young people rather than hearing from the small minority. I just would love to see something done to tackle, well, this issue and that of discrimination generally, to be honest.
Thank you. So you're absolutely right there. You know, the more schools do, the more schools engage. That's really what we want to see. And through our networks and through the head teacher groups, we can absolutely promote and support and encourage schools to engage with this. As you know, we can't mandate, but we can do everything we can to proactively encourage schools to get on board with this. And there are many reasons why schools might not respond to emails. They're very busy places, there's lots of other things going on, and it might not have got to the top of their priority list. Through no decision of theirs, it's just that there is lots going on. So, you know, we will support in terms of taking it to our networks and encouraging schools to engage.
Okay, thank you. Mark next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rose, for this. I was actually honoured when this report come up in full council on the 15th of May to second it, and I think everything that the Medway Youth Council does is really, really good, and bringing up issues that society wants to believe is getting better. But the reality for young people is not too great. A lot of the time, the behaviour of young people is mirroring people that are in the public eye. And all I'd like to ask of yourself, the elected officials are the councillors of Medway Council, what do you want us to do to be able to get that message out that discrimination of any kind is not right?
I think just be out there talking about it, talking about the problems that do exist. Because a lot of time people overlook the problems, pretend they're not really there, when we all know they're there. And we just need to talk about them or talk about how we can stop them. Just making people aware of what they can do, even if it's small little things, just that will make that impact. Yeah, I think everything's about awareness when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Thank you. Adrian.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Rose, once again for a very interesting and detailed report. I've read these probably for the last 12 years as a counsellor, and they've all been very good reports, and you've not been afraid to tackle difficult subjects either, and I think that is very, very worthy. Like some colleagues mentioned before, I was a little bit disappointed that, you know, so many people were experiencing racism and homophobia, because I think generally our community relationships here in Medway are good, but I think this is a warning to us that we can't be complacent. You know, we've got to keep on going on. But from my own personal observation, I think there's an age thing in this, that older people tend to be more racist. And I remember at the time when David Cameron wanted to introduce same-sex marriages, the then vicar of my local church was absolutely appalled by that, and I felt that was not a very Christian response, to be perfectly frank. You know, I think we've all got to learn to live with each other as best we can. So I think it's a really good report. One thing that's not been mentioned that did intrigue me a little bit, and I don't know how the question was asked, but regarding disability, where 35% of the respondents felt that they were disabled. Now, I find that an extraordinarily high figure. On the rest of the recommendations, the only thing I'd be a little bit cautious of the Stonewall one, if not only because of the cost. I followed the link this afternoon and found out that it was £35 per session plus VAT, although they would give you a discount if you had more than 10. So, you know, there is financial implications with that we've got to be a bit careful with. But I did have a look quick through the Growing Up LGBT plus report, and I thought that was all common sense. I was quite impressed with that. So I think that was a good recommendation. And the other one, you know, the YMCA report, again, I think, yes, you know, we've got to keep working at this. But as I said, I think we are going in the right direction as a society. And as I say, these, unfortunately, a lot of the older people have not got the message. But so over time, I think it will get better. But I think what I'm picking up from this is we mustn't be complacent. And, you know, I'd really like to perhaps have the opportunity to discuss in a more informal forum of how we can take it forward as members. So, but thank you, well done, a really good piece of work. Thank you.
Okay. Could Alex come in now? Is that all right?
I'm not sure if it's working. Oh, it is. And thank you so much, because I think it's a really, really helpful discussion and a key theme that does link into the presentation that I'm going to be doing later on, and it's around stigma. And I think there's a challenge there for us in children's social care, really, to take it away and to be able to think about some of the questions that you've raised tonight, really, is what is our response? I know that over the last couple of months, we've been doing a really good piece of work with our staff around leadership in colour, around understanding what it means to be a black worker working in, or a black user of services. And that's, so I think if we can do it for our staff, then there's something that we perhaps need to take away what the report is telling us, have those conversations with our youth workers, but also our social work staff as well, to see how well are we supporting our young people. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly?
And I think there's also an action, Rose, for children to take away understanding what our education safeguarding officer's role is with this. I'm going to ask them to reach out to NYCP to have that conversation with you, to see what learning they can take back to their training with designated safeguarding leads in schools.
Great, thank you. It's George's turn.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Rose. Very, very good report. I think you know, really impressive to see actually the real breadth of schools engaged and involved, because actually a few years ago we didn't have that many schools involved, and particularly it's important that we not only ensure that we've got obviously particularly relevant because we're talking about secondaries, obviously grammar schools represented, but also our comprehensive schools as well, sending delegations and across all of the 5 towns and nearby villages, which is good. I just wanted to ask specifically, though, just about engagement and the sort of outcomes and with the results. I wondered if you were going to be sharing them with schools, because that sometimes can be a good opportunity, particularly some of the recommendations that you've made. And if you have done that so far, what the view's been from them, and anything further you think in particular that the council can do and officers can do to support you with that, I guess. Thank you.
So the report has been sent to all schools, especially those who attended. We made a lovely coloured one, so they got to look at that. I'm not aware of what schools have done with it. I don't know if they've spread it to young people, because again, it's quite hard to get schools to actually engage with us, because as much as we email them, they're not always the quickest to come back. But of course, they're busy and that kind of stuff. So I hope they're taken away and they're looking at it, but I also think it'd be quite interesting to have young people within schools actually be able to read the report and see what conference actually meant, because it's all right for them to come, but they not always aware what actually happens with it after that. So it'd be interesting to actually get some responses back from schools, so we can look into that for you. Thank you.
Lisa?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting us as Medway Parent Carers Forum, because it was a really good event. And we had some, I don't know if anyone's ever seen our little tree. We have a lovely little tree that we put out and asked for advice, and we had some really proud comments on there about how they were proud to be, you know, LGBTQ family, or whether they were proud to be of a certain culture, which was really nice to see. The only thing I do wonder is whether we could work, obviously we're continuing to work together, but how many of those that feel that they're discriminated are actually, if they don't feel that it's being dealt with, are actually then becoming homeschooling children. We know that the homeschooling rate has shot up, and I wonder if there's some way we can look at the data and see how we can work together with that.
Having trouble with my mic, thank you. Do you want to comment on that, Celia?
Thank you, and thank you, Rose. It's really, really good report, as everybody has echoed, and Lisa makes a really good point about where we're looking at our other data, numbers of children missing education, numbers of children who are electively home educated, and the reasons for that. It will take an action away to invite yourself and Roy to maybe come and present at the Medway Education Partnership Group and possibly some of the head teacher forums on your report and on the outcomes of it, so that we can trigger those conversations as well. Thank you.
Nina, please.
Thank you, Jo. First of all, well done to Medway Youth Council. During the last year, as a mayor, I did work quite closely with the Youth Council, and I can't commend enough all the work that goes, you know, so well done to everyone who's involved, including, of course, your mentors and supporters as well. This is very concerning, the report findings, and especially hearing from other councillors who's been doing the councillor work for a long time and feeling that instead of, you know, the incidents of or experiences of discrimination decreasing, it doesn't seem to be abating at all. And these figures, although it does not necessarily mean that it's you know, it captures everybody's experiences, but the snapshot is still quite frightening. And I think we need to really take notice of this. And I'm glad that you've already, Celia's mentioned, the Head Teachers Forum is a good place for this to be shared at. And I would like some pledge from the head teachers when there are incidences of, you know, discrimination that has been reported, to see what, you know, how it is being followed through. As a safeguarding lead, I would take this as a really big concern, because when a young person's emotional well-being is not catered to, then it does impact their overall learning as well at school. So I think it does need to be taken as such. And I would also like to see at the Head Teachers Forum, if there's a robust discussion about how would they tackle these issues when it's reported, because I'm sure you will find differences of practices. So if there are really good practices, then maybe the other head teachers can learn from it. And if there are poor practices, then maybe that does need to be addressed equally robustly. But I think from some of our councillors that have already mentioned, there has to be an evaluation and review of where we are at, perhaps maybe same time next year, if, we hear from other young people about their experiences, or the same children if they're still, okay to take part, to see what the experiences are, because it is important that we have a longitudinal sort of information as well, if things are improving or hopefully not, not going the other way around. So thank you.
Thank you. There are two other people that want to come back in, unless there's anybody else that wants to speak. We're running out of time. So, okay, I'll go to Smitha, then Paula then.
Sorry, Joe, I didn't have any comeback, so I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Sorry, Smitha. Paula.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the recommendations and the ones that are specific for the school and young people services staff. And have you given some thought as to how you would potentially roll out the training that's being recommended? I know that there is a cost implication, but what work has been done around looking at those recommendations and potentially implementing more training for the team here at the council? The other thing I wanted to go back to is that whilst we've got PSHE support in terms of the curriculum for PSHE, I think that we really do need to challenge our schools to think about their whole curriculum and how discrimination is embedded in all subjects, and how they can begin to start the conversations in their schools to tackle those elements within the curriculum that is actually reinforcing certain ways of thinking and behaving, which is a slightly large question, but I do think focusing just on PSHE is not the answer.
Thank you, and I do understand your view, but the recommendations are for schools. Schools are the ones with the responsibility and the funding to deliver this. We're not. And we don't have levers, as I've said before, to mandate or direct. So we can encourage, we can support, we can target where there are particular challenges and have those conversations. And absolutely we do that. But in terms of the kind of blanket approach, everybody has this training, etc., that's not within our gift, unfortunately.
Sorry, I just want to come back. My understanding of the recommendation 5.3 and 5.5 is that that's for council staff. Is that correct? Those recommendations?
Sorry, I went into the link, so it's closed down the report pack. But I think I need to take it back to our education safeguarding officers, see what they're currently doing in respect of the work with the DSLs, and take it back to our workforce development and our principal social worker, Laurie Goosen, to see what work's currently going on with our staff. And we can share that with NYCB.
Leah.
So, given that lots of the issues are around inconsistent handling from schools, and that we're saying we'll only find out about it if schools report it to us, I'm wondering how would we then know where to have those conversations? If we're saying if we see a particular issue, we'll talk to them, but how would we identify that if it's the schools can report it to us or they cannot report it to us? Because if it's inconsistent, then it might not ever get to the point where the schools choose to report it to us.
So the schools have to report it to us in terms of the racist incidents, for example, but it's what they record in their schools. So Some incidents might happen that the school doesn't necessarily record as a racist incident, and I think that's the distinction. So we only get what schools are reporting as official racist incidents.
But, sorry, just quick, does that then mean that we would never particularly know what school might have a pervasive issue? If they get to choose what counts as a racist incident, they get to say whether it's going to, or a home of any sort of discrimination incident, if they get to choose whether, or what level it needs to be at before it gets reported to us, then any particular school out there could have a really bad problem with this, and we'd never know, so we'd never know to have those conversations with them.
So when we assess schools, and we do risk assess and categorise our schools based on a number of factors, it's not only what's reported, we pick up softer information, we pick up what we hear in terms of complaints. If official complaints are made to Ofsted, those are passed through to us. So when we look at our schools and look at the challenges that they're facing and whether we need to have more robust conversations with them, we use a wealth of information, just not that log. But you're right, if it's not reported in that way, the chances are it'll be reported in the concerns that are being raised by parents and young people that come through other channels.
I'm going to say, I can see that there isn't very much we can do about it, but I don't think this is probably not just a Medway issue. This is a national issue that is probably an academy's problem, but it is a huge hole in ever being able to tackle that, and I just wanted to put that out there, really, because there doesn't seem to be anything we can do about it, but it is clearly an issue.
I feel your pain, especially as we've had the Equalities Act since 2010, and it's enshrined in the law. So I totally agree with you. But I think that in your bit next as Vice Chair, and we note the report, and we would be remiss if we didn't say that this report was giving us a powerful message from our children and young people in Medway, and you were right, probably across the nation as well. Can I just ask one quick question to Kelly, if that's possible? Are our children in care, foster carers and parents, aware of what great work our Children and Young People's Council do, and do many of them get the opportunity to join and attend?
I think I'll pass that to my esteemed colleague for corporate parenting next to me.
I think that'll be me.
Sorry.
It's a really, really good question, and I couldn't say that every child in care is aware, and that we work really closely and really strengthening the work that we do with our youth service and our youth council. We've got an initiative going on at the moment around how we can start looking at using the youth council to skill up our children care council in respect of a young inspectors programme, and that I think there's more that we can do. I think we can constantly ensure that those links that each area knows about each other. I think children in care would probably say there are particular I suppose issues and circumstances that they would want to talk about themselves and that. So it's not a direct answer, but there's more that we can do. There are some links there though.
And I think what we can do is ask Andrada, who's our head of provider services, to ensure that the report is sent out to all of our in-house foster carers so that they can have the read as well.
Thank you all. I thought that was... Oh. Leanna, I'm so sorry. Welcome.
No problem, sir. I was just doing a little wave. Thanks so much for the report, Rose. It's really great. My question from the head teacher representative, obviously I'm a head teacher of one of the Medway primary schools. Having been in secondary schools for many years, it's great to see obviously the voice of the secondary pupils speaking out, and from what Celia's saying, sharing this with the head teacher groups will be fantastic. I think it would be really valuable, obviously, to share it with the primary heads as well, because I think if we can get that right in primary school, obviously by the time our children are reaching secondary school, hopefully we're going to see a big decrease of these incidents. So I don't know if there's a gap here where we could possibly, primary schools could do some more work with yourselves as well, because I think what we're seeing now is very grown-up primary children that are au fait with many of these concepts. And as my esteemed colleague said on the left, it is very much part of our PSHE curriculum. And as a head teacher, of course, we want to embed equalities throughout the curriculum, quite rightly. But I think from my perspective, it would be really useful to capture the voice even of the Key Stage 2 children to see, actually, is this a problem that stems from even younger children, in which case, and that's for us to address and for us to look at.
Okay, thank you. Are you happy for your report to go to primary schools as well, Rose?
Yeah, I'd love that. That'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That brings this debate to an end. I think we've all had a robust debate, and I have to say, the quality of the report, and also, I've run training for people, and the feedback that you got is phenomenal of your day. So thank you so much, and thank you everybody for debating it, and thank you for coming this evening. Okay, Vice Chair.
So if I've missed anything, please shout at me, because it was going quite quickly. There was lots of recommendations. So I move the committee notes the Medway Youth Council NYC annual conference report, and we receive a further report on what this looks like in a year from either the same young people or young people of a similar age. Would come back before us and we can monitor what's changed. To feedback on what designated safeguarding leads can do. Can I check, was that to feedback to Medway Youth Parliament or to feedback to us?
Both.
Okay. And then how schools and social work can then further support young people. And the Medway Youth Parliament will be invited to present to the head teachers for and was there another group?
So there's 3 or 4 head teacher groups, so we'll do the rounds.
Okay. And then finally, the report will also be shared with primary school head teachers. Monitor from below.
And foster carers.
Foster carers.
Agreed? Oh.
Just for a point of clarity, it's Medway Youth Council, not Medway Youth Parliament. You said Parliament quite a few times.
That's because I've written. That's because I've written.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, it would be nice if we got someone from our Medway Youth Council in Parliament, wouldn't it? One day. Hope it's on our side. Item 6 of the agenda, if that's agreed. Agreed? Thanks. Item 6 of the agenda, care experience as a protective characteristic. Over to Alex.
And Debbie.
And Debbie, thank you.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. And I'm really excited, to present this report for your consideration this evening. I have a short summary that I want to share with you, and that includes a 5-minute presentation, and then we would be welcome for your comments and any points of clarification that you may have. So I'm going to start in 2023. I made a recommendation to the Corporate Parenting Board to consider care experience as a protected characteristic. At this time, our focus was to improve outcomes for children and young people across Medway. And we know that in July 23, that we received a good rating and were told that children do matter. We have a good care leavers service in Medway. However, despite the hard work of my service, wider colleagues and partners, and you in this room, we know that being care experience has a lifelong impact. Terry Galloway, who is care experienced himself, started this campaign, and he quoted in 2023 that 70% of care experienced people die prematurely. 50% of care experienced people are represented in our prison population. 25% of homeless people have care experience in their background. I find those figures quite stark, and I won't go on to repeat the numbers that are represented in the mental health services or in our unemployment statistics. We know nationally that the campaign continues, with more and more local authorities adding their commitment to not only those that they are corporate parents to, but to those in their communities who are the individuals behind the statistics. We have a short presentation which reflects some of the voices of those care experienced in Medway. So I'm hoping this is going to work. Technology is not my thing. Debbie.
Thank you. I won't go over some of that background. Alex has covered some of that, but it is from the independent review of children's social care, where it was recommended that care experience should be considered as a protected characteristic. Government didn't take up that recommendation, but local councils have been doing so themselves, and Medway, we would like Medway to be one of those many that are joining that campaign. So far, there have been a high number of local authorities, and that number is growing weekly. I want to see Medway on that list as being one of those councils. Next slide, please.
Too far. Told you I'm not good at this. Thank you.
So the next slide, when we get there, is a little bit about we've held forums with young people. Some have been online, some have been in person, and we've just picked out kind of a couple of quotes from that. One young person said to me, this was my kind of bit that I did with a young person, you don't see in school, although perhaps some of what we've heard tonight suggests otherwise, saying you're gay, go and sit over there, so why should a care experienced person here, you're looked after, you need to go out to a meeting now so that we can talk about your future. And I thought that was quite an interesting view to take, and something that our young people do experience. The little bit underneath that about protected characteristic, this is what young people think it should be, that they are safe, that they're not singled out, that they're being heard, that their views are being listened to, that their opinions matter. Children should be having that regardless of whether they're care experienced or not, but they are telling us that they're not having those experiences and those opportunities. Next slide, thank you. This is results of the online poll. I don't know if you can see the numbers there. At the time that this report was written, we'd had 43 responses. Some were young people under the age of 11 to 17. Then we had 18 to 25. We had some care experienced people within the council that also responded to the online poll. And just some of the views that came out of that. Children in care should always be protected from being judged and be able to have the same opportunities as others not in care. It's hard enough growing up away from family, but when you're worried that others judge you and it impacts on your future, it's worse. And like I've just said, having certain appointments like reviews and pathway plans, it is very obvious to people, whether they're in school, whether they're in employment, that they are being pulled away from their day-to-day life to have a meeting with a professional about why they're no longer with their family. And that shouldn't be happening. That isn't right. That's not what we should be putting our children through. Just a little bit more about kind of, again, Rose, it was really interesting what you were saying in your report and what you've said this evening. Our care experienced young people, our children in care, are staying very similar. They kind of, one young person put it as a double disadvantage. So they are a child, they might have a disability, and they are looked after. And some young people were saying, despite that, I've still had an achievement, I've still done well in my life, I've still done something. And children shouldn't have to say, despite something, that they've overcome it and they've got through. Obviously, we celebrate that, and that's wonderful, but it shouldn't be so hard, it shouldn't be so difficult for them to achieve things. Turning that around a little bit, one young person said to me, that additional pressure of being a child in care, you suddenly get all these eyes on you to say, because you're a child in care, because you're care experienced, you must do really well. Just let them be a child, just let them be a young person, regardless of that background, regardless of we are their corporate parent, let's just let them be a child, let's let them be a young person. Next slide, thank you. So I think it's quite evident within the report, and hopefully from what me and Alex have said this evening, we are aspirational for our children in care and our care experienced young people. We are committed to trying to eradicate that discrimination. And again, I know there's lots that, Rose, as you were saying, there's still lots to be done, but we are hoping that considering care experience as a protected characteristic is one step closer to achieving that. It's not going to be an overnight fix, but it's one step closer, and I think it's really important that Medway Council can say we're doing the best for our children in care and care leavers, and we're being the best corporate parents that we can, and to be part of that national campaign. Regardless of the national campaign, let's do this locally for our Medway children and young people. Thank you.
So I'm going to repeat some of what Debbie has already said, just in my closing, that we know our care leavers receive a good service from us as corporate parents, and that's our young people 18 to 25. This report talks about care experienced, and what we are asking you to consider is really to add Medway's voice to the national campaign. It will send a clear message to those care experienced members of our community in Medway that we recognise the impact of their experience. We will continue as a corporate parent and as a children's services to carry out our our statutory responsibilities to children in care. This recommendation is about changing culture, reducing stigma and prejudice, and we are asking for your support and commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Debbie. I think it's really powerful when you put young people's writing and illustrations of their true picture of how they're feeling and, you know, want this as well. I'll open it up to the floor now. Okay, Demola, Smither, Adrian.
Thank you for the report. That was really good, and also obviously alarming the stats that you shared. I think my main thing, and excuse me if I've missed it, was just if we were to approve care experience as a protected characteristic, what does that practically mean for care experienced individuals? I think that's what I'm missing, and again, excuse me if I've missed it in the report.
Thank you. I think that's part of the wider national campaign is actually what does it mean? And that's what our young people are saying to us as well. We hear what you're saying and we appreciate and we can see why there is the national campaign, but actually what does it mean? And I think at the moment, for us locally, it's about that recognition, like Alex was saying, that we are listening to children and young people and we want to support them and kind of eradicate as much as possible that discrimination and stigma that our care experienced people face. At the moment, it would be about Medway Council reviewing policies and looking at the impact of having, like they do with gender and race, what does it mean when you're writing a policy, when you're forming a service, if a care experienced young person was to pick up that policy, would they see themselves in it and be able to not be impacted negatively on what we're saying we're going to do? Whether that's a housing policy, whether that's a financial policy, whatever it might be, is when writing policies, that impact of considering care experience as another characteristic not to discriminate against. Does that make sense? Alex might want to add to that.
Can I just add one thing? And I think it's the question, Debbie's right, that is being asked nationally by care experienced people. And I think for me, it's also a tool to enable conversations to take place, to raise awareness, and it's only then in the longer run. And Terry Galloway talks about this. Actually, the aim of the campaign is ideally to reduce the stigma, so we don't have to talk about it, we don't have to have it as a protected characteristic, but this is a tool that will enable us as officers, you as members, to actually start having conversations or to add strength to your conversation.
Sorry, I just had a quick follow-up. Yeah, I just wanted to say kudos to this council and also to other councils who have picked it up, because obviously I know you mentioned that the government hasn't, so I can understand that you don't really know what that looks like long term, but I'd definitely be interested into seeing what that practically looks like for care experienced individuals. But thank you.
I have to say, before we took over the council, when I last looked about protective characteristics for care leavers, there were 63 authorities. Now there are over 90. So, you know, I think it's moving in the right direction. And I always say this, but I know Debbie and Alex are, you know, like the legendary when it comes to, you know, cocooning, but also liberating our children and young people in care for Medway. And, you know, when I look at I know we're a good, but sometimes I just, you know, when I can't sleep, whatever, look at the criteria to be outstanding, and I do feel we're launching that way. So thank you. Smitha.
Thanks, Jo. Yes, I also think this is excellent to see. This makes me really proud that, you know, this is in front of Medway Council and that we'll adopt this. So, and it's just common sense to expand it from care leavers to care experience. So I think it's an excellent move. I have a question around, so all the, whatever support and facilities you'll offer care experienced young people, would that cover young people placed in Medway from other local authorities? And the reason I'm asking this is because I've been advocating for a young man in my ward, and I've been doing this for a year now, and I'm just hitting brick walls everywhere I go. But there seems to be this arbitrary system where young people are moved and kind of kicked about in the system, and then they spend years in another local authority because no fault of their own or no choice of their own, but then they can't get support in that local authority. So care experienced, since that's broadening the category somewhat, will that then include young people from other authorities who are placed here?
It's forever going to be an issue, I think, and I think regardless of what we say here tonight, that is always going to be an issue because every local authority has their pressures and has their resources and financial pressures. What I think this does is we are saying care experienced young people regardless, but our service provision in law, in leaving care law, is still those that are Medway young people. Similarly, Kent's young people, whatever local authorities young people. So there is, the leaving care duties aren't changing to our Medway young people, but what we're saying is care experience in equality law, we are broadening it in that sense. So what we'd hope to see is that, say it was a housing issue, that because care experience is a protected characteristic, regardless of what local authority you'll go to, if that local authority or government are saying it is a protected characteristic, they will apply it to their local legislation. That's the ultimate goal. Regardless of who looked after you, who your corporate parenting is, if care experience is a protected characteristic nationally, they will fall under that policy.
Thank you. That's excellent. Very positive. And just one final question. In the budget and policy framework section, it only talks about the policy framework. So I was just curious what the budget implications of this are.
In all reality, it's different for each department. So some of them, there wouldn't be any financial implication because they may already be doing it, for example. But others, there could be a wider implication. So it really is up to each one and when each policy is changed, because I'd assume there'd be a staggered approach to as when they come in. But we will cross each one of those as we come to them.
Can I just add to that? I think that, you know, if the Medway decides to accept the recommendation, our thinking was that we would take this to our Equalities Board and we would start to implement it. And it might be a slow implementation into actually the reviews, the equality impact statements that we're doing. And for me, it's about asking questions. So we didn't feel at this stage that there was a significant financial impact. The slight impact would be in terms of people having to update policies to reflect that protected characteristics is now included.
Okay, yeah. Right, next I have Adrian.
Thank you, Joe. I must confess, when I first read this report a couple of days ago, I finished reading it with the sort of impression, this is just going to be a virtue signalling exercise. I'm glad Alex and Debbie, you've fleshed it out, because now, I'm a lot more reassured that it's not that, because, it's a waste of time, isn't it, if we don't do it. And also, like my colleague over there, I was a little bit concerned, well, what are the practical things that we do to make a difference for our young people? One that comes to mind, there's an initiative that we started probably a couple of years ago, but I'd like a bit of report back. Now, the idea of treating the council like a family firm and give opportunities within the council to our young people, which is excellent, but I would like, if it's possible, if the Vice Chair could put this as part of the recommendation, to have a briefing note on that. How many young people have we actually offered an apprenticeship to, and how they got on? Because I think these are the practical things that are going to make the big difference. We're a big organisation. We should, and our care leaver population is quite small. So, with just the council, let alone Medway North and all the other people that we've got an influence with, we should be able to make that big difference. So, could we have that report? Because I think, and that'd be interesting. Perhaps, Joe, we could also have that at corporate parenting as well, to get 2 bites of the cherry.
Well, I'll have a word with Adam, but what I do think, Adrian, is I do think that might be a little bit of a duplication, because we do have that with partnerships and sort of NEETs and stuff. Yeah. And this committee is already quite loaded. So I'd rather not duplicate, but I will have a word with Adam about, making sure it goes through the right channels for corporate parenting.
But I think it is important that members have the satisfaction that we are actually making a difference. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex,
So, again, it's a really, really valid point, and I think one of the things that, if the recommendation is accepted, we could look at bringing back next year is a report on what difference has it made. I know other authorities, again, including it in their equalities impact statement, actually opens the door for us to be a lot clearer about actually how many people in our community do have care experience, how many actually are employed with Medway, and if we start to include it in our policies and in our impact statements, then actually people are going to come forward and we're going to be able to collect that data to then be able to change and target resources in the future, so that we can be more confident that actually, yes, we're getting apprentices not just for our 16 to 25 cohort, but actually we are touching care experienced people within Medway. So I hope.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Leah.
So I feel like I'm going to end up even just more frustrated than before, because my question is in a similar vein to the discussion that we had. But where 7.5 has schools raised as a specific area of concern, I wondered what we can do to mitigate this, and whether we could do workshops with school staffs, particularly the pastoral team, so that if issues occur between students, then at least the staff are well informed and equipped to deal with it. And now tell me we can't do anything, but I'll wait.
I know an issue came up in corporate parent and board, and our virtual school did do some work as part of their statutory training that they have to provide to schools. And we can revisit that with parents, with our schools. And I must say a lot of our schools do follow that trauma-informed approach, and part of that trauma-informed approach is about understanding and respecting stigma, discrimination, the impact of children and young people's experiences. But we can never rest. We always have to be forward planning and thinking, is there more that we can do? And I'm happy to take, I don't have all the answers today, but I can take it away and we can constantly look at what else can we do. I'll give you that assurance.
Nina.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for the report. As somebody who is very much invested in working with looked after children, I welcome this proposal from yourselves and the fact that all of us are welcoming this report and the proposal. It goes to show that there is a collective commitment and high aspirations when it comes to our looked after children, and so it should be. I would like to also highlight that when we talk about looked after children or children leaving care, we do talk about the lower outcomes, but there are so many of our young people leaving care who have gone on to do amazing things in life, and they are great role models. And although, Debbie earlier pointed out, there is this cliche of saying, like, despite this, actually, irrespective of the trauma that they experienced, what it goes to show is through therapeutic caregiving and the joint support that the children have received, the encouragement, the warmth, the stability, it does make a huge difference in how the aspirations as well as the projectile for that child will change over time. So it goes to show that, with the collective spirit, all aimed at, supporting the child, it can change the life chances for the child. Having said that, I think what Councillor Galvin earlier pointed out about whether we can do something else in terms of supporting those aspirations, and whether, and Medway Council being such a large organization as well, I'm conscious that, the 18 plus social workers do the pathways for our children about to leave care, and it is, I do see a lot of good practice in terms of them starting 6 months earlier, and I do wonder sometimes if there's any chance or scope of, like when we start planning after post-16, whether we can look at the work experiences, opportunities within the council for the child's chosen area that they want to do college or universities later on. Because there are so many different departments in the council, and I was wondering if there can be scope of exploration within the council teams. The other thing that I would like to second and very much welcome is virtual schools working with the local schools about really hammering home the trauma-informed approach, because so often I still see young people who are looked after being described by their behaviors rather than the empathy and insight that we need from school teachers about why a child is presenting in a certain way and not necessarily engaging the lessons. So it is very much needed. The other thing that I would like to request is, I think with regards to protected characteristics, sometimes with looked after children, when we are applying for school spaces, they are given priority. I was wondering if Medway Council can also consider shortlisting any child or care experienced young person applying for jobs at the council, because I think some local authorities do that, and also if there is any scope for refining or fine-tuning the job applications, whether they can be support for our care experienced young people to do that. So those are my issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that work? Yeah, thank you. I'll pick up on those, because actually, in terms of your initial question about what we can do, we are the corporate parent, so we can do everything that a parent would do, and we absolutely do push aspiration. We want the right things for our young people, and the virtual school picked that up. So when you're talking about post-16, post-18, etc., those conversations are being had. Those conversations start as soon as the child comes into care, or kind of, year 8, year 9, what's your curriculum pathway, what school are you going to? And we do monitor and track the kind of outcomes within schools. We do have, so there's aspiration officers, there's our NEAT team that look at where young people go, how many come into the council in terms of roles, apprenticeships, supported internships, those kind of things, and where they go into college, etc., and the retention rate in those courses, because we do see, particularly with our care experienced young people, that they sometimes start but then fail to stay in there. And that report does go in quite a lot of detail to the corporate parenting board, so looking at our own care experienced young people. In terms of the trauma-informed work, so Medway and Medway schools have committed to being trauma-informed. We commission a knowledge change action that's delivering training to our Medway schools. We've got 104 schools, 75 are already on or nearly complete on that programme. So that is rolling out across all schools because that supports our inclusion work within our schools anyway. In terms of the shortlisting in jobs, I think we do that already. I think it's automatic interview if they're a care experienced young person.
I forgot to ask one more question about the children's feedback about meetings taking place at schools. And I must admit, sometimes I have attended meetings at school, but it is because the meetings have been arranged as such and we're invited. So how often are the IROs or different professionals still organizing the meetings or lecture reviews at schools? Because if it's held at school, that's where the professionals or foster carers are invited, and maybe we need to be listening to our children and young people over there.
Yeah, I think some of the feedback that was captured from our young people's voices was from some of our older cohorts saying, I remember being pulled out of a lesson to go to a looked after review. We try and avoid that where possible. Obviously, things like PEPs might happen at a school, but it's at a time that suits the child and if they're in agreement with it. If they say, I don't want you coming into school, I think any child with a social worker, we would listen to that and do the meetings elsewhere. So there is a shift in that, and there has been over a period of time, really. And just to confirm, if a person ticks that they are care experienced, then they do automatically get shortlisted. What we want to get to is a point where they don't necessarily have to tick a box, because it's that ticking a box again, isn't it? But that is already in place, so we do already do that.
And if I can just add to that, I think there is still a need for a cultural change, and I don't think that's specific to Medway. And that, but in respect of schools, we are now in the process of rolling out our electronic PEP, which will mean that actually those children and young people can sit with, whether that's the social worker, their teacher, after school, or they can sit with their foster care and do their input into the PEP. And actually the meeting can still take place with that young person's views, but doesn't disrupt their education. So that's one of the benefits of having an e-PEP.
Great. James?
Thanks. Just to build on what people were saying, there's just a couple of things I wanted to highlight. So clearly, I endorse what's being proposed and moving forward. I think it would also be our ambition to embed this into what we do as a council. So Councillor Galvin's nodding there, but particularly around things like procurement. Previously, we've embedded things like apprenticeships under there. This will help move that a step forward and say not just apprenticeships we want, but actually we want you to actively seek out young people who've got care experience to come and work on the projects and work in the teams that we're doing as a council. So that will be another angle that we can look at. The other thing I just wanted to highlight, and I won't go into too much detail, but again links into what people have said, is we were recently successful with a DFE funding bid for a residential apprenticeship programme, which means we'll train up to 12 young people who are care experienced, pay for all their training, get them on the apprenticeship, do the learning, but also they'll do the practical learning in places like Eden House, Parklands, all of those sorts of things, because we know, having spoken to our young people through different forums, actually a lot of them are quite keen to come back and help other young people like themselves, but they just haven't necessarily had that route. So already working with people like the Young Lives Foundation, we've had a lot of young people going, I'd be really interested in doing that. If I can not just do the qualifications that I need to, you know, forge a career, but actually you can support me doing that and I can have practical experience working in Parklands, Rivermead, Eden House. So actually that's coming online in the next 6 months. So again, it's another good example about how we're doing as well as saying, I suppose, as part of this.
Liz?
Thanks, Joe, and yeah, thanks very much for the report. And just sort of picking up on sort of the question that Nina just raised, actually, because I suppose what I was worried about was a similar question about what will this actually look like in practice, because I was sort of concerned that it could have unintended consequences, because as in the presentation you mentioned that young people don't want to be treated differently, and there was the things that they highlighted about like the meetings in schools that they didn't like. But I'm just sort of pleased to hear that it will be used more as a tool actually to then listen to the young people and actually, you know, them direct how the professionals work rather than sort of having things put upon them. So yeah, that was just really more of a comment that I didn't want this sort of a protected characteristic to actually have the opposite outcome to what we want.
And I think that is something that we are mindful of, and I think it's learning from the other councils that have perhaps had it in for a little bit longer. I've recently been at a forum with other local authorities, and the first local authority that did it said they're kind of still learning from it and sharing that feedback. So we're learning from previous lessons, which I guess is a good position to be, but also being mindful that it needs to be purposeful. We don't want additional stigma to come from it, which obviously of the other 9 protected characteristics, a lot of young people or people would say that there is additional stigma because it's a protected characteristic. So we need to be mindful of how we aim those conversations, how we aim our policies, what our responses look like. So we are mindful of that, and I think policy writers will be mindful of that as well. And can I just add a comment just in relation to what James was saying? In addition to that as well, we are working with James's commissioning team and getting young people involved in kind of being our young inspectors, being our ambassadors, actually come and work with our services. What do you want, for example, a supported accommodation to look like? What do you want the Care Leavers Hub to look like? And kind of formulating an ambassador group. So there's an ongoing working group on that. And obviously the intention would be a training package around that, but then work experience to come from that, potentially a job opportunity to come from that. So those things are in place, and hopefully in a year's time, 6 months' time, we will start to see some of the impact of that and have more of our care experience people, not just young people, working within the council, because as we've said, we've got a lot of companies, a lot of services within the council and locally that want to work with our young people.
Right, Vice Chair.
So I move that the committee noted the report, and then I've slightly tweaked Councillor Govins about for the committee to receive, rather than a briefing note, I didn't write it when I thought it, so for the committee to receive updated reports, and maybe what you said about the partnership, the bit that's already made, if that can just come to us so we can at least read it and see what was happening. That saves the duplication of anyone else having to rewrite it. So that's that report on how many care experienced young people have received opportunities or roles through the council, and that we will explore what more can be done through schools.
Okay, is that seconded?
Seconded.
And agreed? Thank you. Item 7 now, early years. We're running a bit below, a bit over time, but I think we've had some really good debates, so thank you. Rebecca, please.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. So the report that we've put together for you this evening is in response to the questions that Councillor Howcroft-Scott raised in relation to early years entitlement and the changes to the preschool funding rates that we've rolled out in Medway. So happy to take questions and comments in relation to this and provide a little bit of an update as we go in relation to things that have happened since writing the report as well.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Can I say thank you for answering my questions? And you know, really fully, these questions were not just from me, they were from, you know, the Labour group, really. But so I don't want to feel that I'm not a team player, because I am. Thank you. Mark.
Thank you, Jo. Having my wife worked in the childcare sector for coming up for nearly 30 years, and yes, it's all good with bringing in this free childcare, but looking on the numbers and the figures that are given, with the under twos, the ratio in the nurseries is 1 to 3. So at any one time, any number between 1 and 3 has to have one member of staff with them. And if you're looking at minimum wage, you're 11.44. If they've only got one child in that age group, that's 9.20. But if you then look, if they've got 3 in that age group, if they take one of them to the toilet or to change nappy, they still have to have another member of staff left there. And with the smaller chains, there is no real leeway, because if you look at the 1 to 3, they're going to have 2 members of staff, even on minimum pay. They'll make £4.72 on that, which when you take into having a leadership costs on top of that, the building and everything else they have to do, because there's a heck of a lot of paperwork in this. The funding is not really there. And currently, to hit these ratios, which are a legal requirement, my wife's nursery is having to take on agency staff, and they charge £21 an hour. So straight away, if you're getting an agency staff, you're making a loss, and it's just making it very, very hard. There's a nursery, quite a successful nursery called Beehive in Cuxton, that's at the end of this year is going to be closing, because the school whose ground it's on, where schools are being encouraged to open their own preschool for years 3 to 4, where the ratio is 1 to 8, means there's even though it's a lower rate, overall they can make more money on that age group. Taking that out has meant that they've made a decision in conjunction with the school that the school will take over the whole function. And there's a lot of other smaller nurseries that run out of community buildings that are making decisions whether, with this all coming in, if it's going to be feasible to continue. I know at the moment it's saying that we've got enough places, but when you look at the people that responded, 21 out of 245, less than 9% responded, because a lot of these organisations have been saying for a long time, prior to this coming in, that a lot of them are not going to survive. Nobody's listened, and I'm not surprised at the amount of people that bothered responding, because they know that nothing's going to change. What are we doing to support these organisations? Because if we lose them at the rate that they are going at the moment, we will not have enough places to cater for this. And one of the questions I saw, I wasn't here when the question was asked, with regards to the rates, and Medway and the rest of the South East been the poor relations to London. But it's no cheaper to live and work this close to London than it is in London nowadays. And the funding formulation, I have a nephew that goes to school in London. He doesn't pay for any school trips. He doesn't pay for any after-school clubs. He doesn't pay for any additional needs they need within the school. It's all included because the funding is so much different. And there is parents in the South East that can afford to do this. There's a lot of parents that can't, and that budget is falling on the schools, so either they decide to cover that cost and cut something else, or they just don't do it anymore. And so what is actually being done what has been done to ask and challenge these figures, because these figures have been going back not just on this government. You go back to the government before that, the funding formulation for schools outside of it, and then their argument is that the cost of living is a lot dearer. But I, 6 years ago, looked at the funding for different areas. Merseyside gets very close to what London gets.
And if somebody tells me that cost of living in Merseyside when I've got family up there is a lot more expensive than the South East, they're obviously delusional. And someone needs to stand up and argue for our children. Make sure our children are getting the same opportunities, getting to do the same amount of things as children from from other areas of this country. Because the people in this part of the country pay as much tax as people in London, the people in Merseyside and other areas that are getting higher fees. Sorry for ranting on a bit.
Okay, can I go to Maria to answer that first? Rebecca, please.
Okay, so first of all, the funding comes from central government. It's based on a calculation. There are very detailed calculations behind this formula. Now, some of those calculations, I absolutely admit, haven't been updated for several years. I've actually lobbied and tried to lobby on behalf of Medway Council. That's not just Medway, but most of the local authorities in the South East and actually across England are also lobbying about some of those changes. Some of the indicators, for example, go back to 2003 and haven't been updated. And as you can imagine, Medway has changed quite dramatically since 2003. But those base rates are what they are. We have lobbied to change them. We give out 95% of them. We are trying to increase that. In terms of the consultation, you're absolutely right. We need to increase our responses, but some of the changes we introduced, for example, such as the top slicing of 1% for the 2-year-olds and SENDIF funding, was actually as a result of some of the consultation feedback we had. So that's one of the changes we've brought in. In terms of the rates being absolutely low enough, personally, I would probably agree with you, but the funding is what we give, and we can't give out any more funding than we actually get in response. Did I manage to cover all of your questions, or did I miss any of your parts there? Perfect, thank you.
Okay, Rebecca.
Thank you. So just in addition to Mariah's points, part of our role is to support our providers, recognising that they are independent businesses and there are those vulnerabilities around the ratios that have been discussed here. And we have a very effective and well-attended early years forum that we've had in place for a number of years now to bring together providers to air those concerns, to look at some solutions and to encourage them to respond to those consultations, or the recent survey, for example, that we've just put out with our providers to ask, are you going to have sufficiency in terms of staffing, and are you what's your response? How can we support you further? And I'm pleased to say that we've had about 104, 110 responses to date in only a matter of a few days. So really positive, but we will continue to convene that forum, support our providers and ensure that they're sharing their practice amongst or in response to an issue that as Mariah's outlined, is coming down from government and helping us to make sense of that in our local landscape.
Thank you. Damara?
So I thank you for the report, first of all, and I'm hoping I haven't misunderstood some of the percentages. So it says local authorities are required to pass through 95% of these rates to early year providers. Out of the 95%, 1% is retained for special education needs. I think my question is, why has only 1% been retained for special education needs, given that the number of SEND children is on the rise, including early years? Just interested to know how that figure was reached.
Okay, Mariah.
So we were trying to strike a balance because it's all coming out of the 95% effectively percentage, and the more percentage we set aside for early years, the less percentage is going into the base funding for the remainder of the other proportions. So we're trying to strike that balance between what we need to set aside for SEND and what we need these nurseries to have as a base funding element. And one of the other implications is we cannot give a provider less within certain parameters than they had in the previous year. So we are trying to increase our SEND allocation, but we have to do it in a staged way.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, I think you really just answered my question in a way, but yeah, it's very much the fact that, yeah, thank you for inviting us to the forum, SEND forum, the early years forum, because we attend that as well. I do have concerns because obviously we've come back from that and worked with some of the early years providers who have clearly said to us they've got over half of their children in their provision who have SEND. So that is a big concern, and you know, obviously that might be some schools that, some providers more than others, but I do have concerns that that 1% is not enough to support that half the population of the provision.
Rebecca.
Thank you. We have a team of early years SEND advisors that work with our preschool settings to help ensure that a child's needs that are identified as special educational needs may not be just a developmental delay, and something that with some support they can then close the gap between the areas that they're struggling with and the area or working at the age appropriate level. So there is an ongoing piece of work amongst our providers who are really engaging well with us as a collective early years SEND team to be able to look at the training for those people in preschool settings to distinguish between, as I say, a SEND need or a delay. That's not to minimise at all, because I recognise what you're saying, Lisa, in terms of it's an increase that we're seeing. So it's by no means questioning the point that you've made there, but there is an ongoing piece of work which our settings are engaging well with, and the support that the early years SEND officers are providing has been received well.
Smither.
Thank you, Jo. I must say, Mark, very impassioned speech about how unfunded early years is. We can keep a seat warm for you this side. We agree with you completely. It's not really, you know, what our young people deserve, early years. I have a question about how this funding sort of compares to other regions. Like, where do we stand in terms of the highest funded, you know, area? And how does Medway compare to that?
I do have the hourly rates for other local authorities. I can send those information around to you. Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you exactly where we are, but I know we are one of the lower funded.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you and the early years team, Julia, for answering our questions. I do feel that I wish we were in places, socialist countries like Finland, where you can't work with early years unless you've got a master's degree, and the outcomes are better. And I know Gordon Brown showed that to us with Sure Start and the recent correlation to extra GCSEs and launch pads to better futures. But let's hope all is on the front to change soon. Okay, thank you. Vice Chair.
I move that the committee notes the director's comments in response to the members' item, and I didn't pick up anything else.
Is that seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Okay, item 8, thank you, is the SEN Local Area Partnership, or LAP, Improvement Plan 2024-25.
Thank you. So as you are aware, we had our joint area partnership SEND inspection in February, and it was a very robust process, and we were pleased with the outcome. The outcome did highlight a lot of strengths and really showed the improvements that a number of services had made on their journey in terms of improving the provision for children and young people with SEND. The inspection highlighted that experiences for children and young people were inconsistent. That is correct, we agree with that. And it highlighted 6 key areas of improvement that we needed to focus on, which we, when I say we as the partnership and with parents and carers and our stakeholders, have worked to develop a plan that sits alongside our SEND strategy and really focuses on those 6 key areas that Ofsted identified. In terms of the journey of the plan, Ofsted have approved the plan and we report back to the DFE and NHSE every 6 months on our progress towards that plan. The plan you have in the pack, so I would open to any questions, please.
Okay. Leah, then Adrian.
Hi, so I had a few in there separate on here. So the first one was that I'm wondering if there was something that we can send at the point before diagnosis. So as soon as the child's identified as potentially struggling, either by schools or parents, that can explain what the process looks like and what support is available. Like in 2 bits, so with a diagnosis and without the separate support that parents can access. Because as a parent that's currently trying to decide what's best for a child who's been recently diagnosed, it's so convoluted and confusing to even just know what's out there. And I'm a counsellor, so I have access to more info than the average parent. So if I'm finding it like a minefield, I don't know how anybody else ever manages to access support.
Thank you. And absolutely, the kind of communication, the messaging and the availability of information to parents was highlighted as one of the areas of improvement. We are in the process of revising our local offer, and that all of the information of what's available is on our local offer, so to make it more accessible. Also, during half term, we launched the inclusion teams in the family hubs. So there are front-facing staff now. There are drop-in times for parents who can come in and just ask the question and speak to a person and get support to navigate the system. And they went live at the end of May. And that is really helpful. And we know when we've done that work with parents and carers previously, and we've set up in the Pentagon, we've had a lot of footfall and lots of parents able to get support much earlier on and help to navigate the system. So there is work in here very clearly to address that.
How are we then communicating that to parents at that point where they identify that their child might have some additional support needs? How are they then told where to go, if that makes sense?
So, depending on who does that, so schools have the information. So if it's a school-led thing, then they have that information. If it's a health thing, so if they have a health diagnosis, there is work to be done about linking in how that is sent to parents, because obviously they get the official letter, but then it's the link up of the next step, which is within the plan to address.
And then I had, looking at Area for Improvement 3, which is mostly around timescales, it's kind of easy for us to think, oh, we're on par with national timescales, or there's a national shortage of specialists like educational psychologists, but so there's not much we can do. But when your child's in need of support and you're waiting for one backlog service so you can access another backlog service, none of that really matters. And then my inbox is full of parents saying that we aren't meeting timescales, mostly due to the lack of educational psychologists. And I wondered if we were seeing any changes in the trend around that, or just what's that? I saw that we're looking at recruitment strategies, but I just wondered if there was already any changes that can be communicated.
So there are a number of strategies that are in place or are being put in place. In terms of educational psychologists particularly, we have, when we say restructured, we've brought in a more tiered approach to educational psychologists. So we have principal, and then we have more assistant ed psychs that we've brought in so that we can process referrals more quickly. We are using agency ed psychs. We are using as many as we can find, and unfortunately, and something that I'm not particularly keen on, that means that we have some ed psychs that are not local and are assessing children that they won't actually meet face to face, which is not where we want to be, but we need to bring them in. We are also about to publish guidance to families around the use of independent EPs. So historically we haven't accepted independent reports because there is statutory assessment that needs to be completed. We are going to lift that restriction for a year independent educational psychology reports we will review. It's not a guarantee that we'll take them, but our EdSpsych team will review them quickly, and if there is enough information in there to write the report, we will do that. We're going to do that for a year to help reduce that time frame. We are also about to go out with a consultation with schools around the top-up funding for a child without an EHCP, because at the moment our EHCP waiting time is on average 40 weeks. So it takes 40 weeks for it to come through, and that's a long time for a child to be in school without the support. So we're changing back from the SEND notional budget top-ups to the non-EHCP top-ups, pending the outcome of the consultation with the schools, which we are expecting to be a positive one, so that intervention can come in before the need for an EHCP.
And my very last one was around area of improvement 6. It was just about the partnership reviewing the available activities to identify gaps. I wondered if we have explored child-friendly Medway offering more SEND-specific sessions. So I know they do some bits, but there's not much kind of SEND stuff.
Yes, the short answer to that is yes. Child-friendly are absolutely looking at their sessions, and you're right, they do targeted sessions for children with SEND, but when we talk about inclusivity, we talk about making everything available with the access. So the team are definitely looking at that.
Sorry, can I just come in on that point? If you're going to recognise independent reports, then I wonder if that creates a tier system, because actually, you know, families in my ward, which is the poorest ward or one of the poorest wards in Medway, would not be able to afford to commission a report, and therefore those children are going to be at a disadvantage. From parents who are also often disadvantaged because they're worrying about how they're going to get some food on the table for breakfast rather than, you know, having the pennies to pay. And I know it's upwards of £500 for one single report. So that's not fairness or parity, is it?
No, you're absolutely right, and we discuss this a lot in terms of making these decisions. The guidance will come out with lots of FAQs that go with it, because we looked at what other local authorities are doing. So for a period of time, we will refund up to a point the reports that have been commissioned if they are acceptable. It won't be the top end of the reports that something, you know, cost. But you're right, there's absolutely a disparity there in terms of families that couldn't afford to stump it, you know, put the money up front. But what we're trying to do is to clear the significant backlog. And actually, if some families are doing it, then children waiting for REPs will go further up the list and move more quickly as well. So I absolutely agree. It's not a perfect answer, and it's not where we want to be in the longer term, but it will help relieve pressure on the system, which will benefit all children that are waiting.
Well, it makes me feel like after the election I should set myself up doing reports for people in my ward or people that can't afford them, because 38 years of teaching, I should, you know, as a postgraduate SEND qualification, I just think it's absolutely outrageous, personally. Box Joe. Adrian.
Thank you, Joe. A couple of questions. It was good to see that we're on track with the safety valve programme, and which, you know, is vital for the whole council, although it's important for the children, the people involved, but also the fact we've got a negative reserve, which is inhibiting what the council can do in a lot of other areas as well. So as soon as we can get out of that position, we'll be in a much better financial position. As part of this, if I've got it right, as part of the safety valve programme, we had to make certain improvements. Just wondered if Celia or somebody could just give us an outline of what improvements have been made, you know, was it worth doing? And just a comment, I found the report interesting, but it was not aimed at lay people. There were far too many acronyms, and I think when you get these very technical reports for members who are not specialists, by and large, I think a glossary would have certainly helped, because normally there's a convention, certainly with scientific papers, that if you're going to use an acronym, the first time you do it, you actually put in brackets the full thing, so, and then you can refer back to it, which you can with some of these, but a lot of them, they didn't do that. It was very, very patchy, so I found it a very difficult report to read. Interesting, but very difficult, got to say. Thank you.
Could I just interject there, Adrian? I would like to thank Celia, because I know down the road in Bexley they're outstanding for ILACs, but they're inadequate for SEND. And Celia has been doing a job like a Trojan horse with our admin and PA support for a very long time. So I think on this occasion we might need to overlook that, because, you know, as an assistant director, I think she's been doing more than her fair share. And when I saw her at Parent Forum, to see the respect that she has from our parents, which I know as a resident of Medway for over 3 decades, wasn't always the case. I think we can let that one slip this time.
Happy to do that, because I think, yes, it is. You can see from the report that certain things have been done, but certainly I think when it does come, just make a general comment that if you do have a very technically based report, if we could just do a quick glossary, that would just help.
Thank you, and that's noted. That's a good point. We are working on a parent-friendly version, so, but you're right, a glossary would be, yes. And thank you, Joe, for your kind comments. In terms of the safety valve, there were 5 key priority areas. The first one was around increasing the support for inclusion in mainstream schools. As you know, the number of children with the HCPs in our mainstream schools is significantly lower than national and our statistical neighbours. It was about improving our commissioning function so that the cost of our independent provision was being managed, and the young people that were being put out, actually there was appropriate contractual arrangements and a management of the ever-increasing cost of those placements. It was about having the right number of placements, so growing the resource provisions, growing the capacity of our special schools to be able to cater for the need that is in Medway, so that appropriate forecasting. And it was about having a system that was financially viable within the in-year envelope of funding that we get. And you're right, we are sitting on a positive surplus at the end of the year, and you might think, well, that's 2 million that we could be put back into the system. By 2026, if we continue to meet the targets, it'll be a 4 million positive surplus, but we would have by that point had the funding from the ESFA. That means we will not have a high needs deficit. And so at that point, whilst this is painful, I know for our education providers, we've flat cashed some of it. We've been quite harsh about some of the funding. If we get to that point in 2026, we've got a 4 million surplus on a high needs block based on our current projections in terms of the funding coming in, and a system that is sustainable within the funding that we're getting, then you're right, things can get better, and there's more surplus in the system to invest in some of the other things that would be nice to have, rather than just our statutory duty around that.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, I want to echo your thanks, to be honest, Joe, because Celia does attend quite a lot of our events, and our families do speak to her, and she resolves contacts them straight away, which actually makes a big difference to somebody. They feel listened, they feel that someone's doing something. I think I can confirm for this council that actually that we do work quite closely with Celia, and our parents do feed back into, especially this paper today. and I have a very busy diary on, thanks for that. But that's good because it means that we're having that voice in everything, to be honest, at the moment, including social care, not just education, but social care, health as well. And I think that makes a big difference for our families. Don't get me wrong, it's not fixed. There's a lot to do, and I think the council know that, and I think our officers are fully aware of that. And I think that makes a big difference. We know what the problem is. We have an idea on how to fix. It's not overnight, but it's happening, and it's a slow turning process.
Brilliant, and thank you too. I hope to catch up with you at the Sports Centre on Saturday, I believe, Parent Forum. Right, Wayne. I'm so sorry. I saw you wave at me.
By years.
Right. Let's. Okay. Right. Let's move on. To echo what you said, Joe, and Lisa said about Celia, I think it's very impressive work. And I think we should acknowledge actually, whilst we have got this improvement plan that we're working on here, actually the positive stuff that came out of that inspection report, I think particularly highlighting those positive things across the service, but indeed across the partnership, not just within the council, of course, other partners from health and elsewhere, which is really good. I've got a few questions, and they sort of are quite specific around some of the areas of improvement. So the first one's just around the area around KPIs, which obviously was, as is highlighted in the plan and in the report, was a key issue. I'm just interested, obviously we've got the framework development and we're talking about developing the KPIs that they mentioned, but I'm just interested in how we're then going to ensure these are embedded within the service and within the approach. And particularly sort of what we see as not only supporting the, in terms of the intentions within the council, but across sort of the partnership board as well. My second question is just about communication. We're talking about obviously the need to improve particularly the communication with children and young people and their families. I'm just interested to know how there's obviously stuff in here about looking at the looking at some of the materials we're producing and the local offer on the website, etc. I'm just interested in how we're ensuring that they are inclusive, particularly because we're dealing with people with special educational needs and disabilities, just how we're ensuring that they sort of meet the requirements of end users and just ensuring that they don't get lost in that process, because often when we do consultation around some of this stuff, we end up focusing on sort of some of the loudest voices. I'm just very keen that we get a cross-section and wide views from users of the service and their families. And then just sort of following on from that within communication, and just interested about, we're talking about young people reviewing the local offer, just about what we're doing to benchmark the local offer against maybe some of what other outstanding authorities are doing, and how we can sort of better integrate that local offer and also the communication around that local offer with other services that we've got around the council. And then just finally on the co-production element, which is becoming, I think, an ever increasingly important piece of work, and we've got lots of good stuff going on with the Parent and Carers Forum, etc. They're just interested to know about what obviously we've got some specifics here about, improving the process, bringing in other voices, and it sort of links back to my earlier question about communication, but how are we just going to ensure that as we move forward, we're almost a co-production first type of service, which I think is the way a lot of authorities are moving to. So just be interested in what we're doing to further enhance that, because as I say, I know a lot of, particularly authorities that have got outstanding on the new framework, particularly that's almost, it's not sort of viewed as co-production as sort of a thing that happens. It's actually viewed as the primary objective when you go into the design of the service and also the review of the service. So, be interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the KPIs, the improvement priority around that was about the partnership knowing and holding each other to account. So actually, as individual services, as SEND, as health, there's lots of data, there's lots of KPIs, and there's lots of monitoring. But it was about how we bring that together collectively so that as a partnership, we are monitoring and holding each other to account, as well as doing it in our own individual operation. So in terms of what we've got at the moment, the data and the KPIs are there, but we are doing a bit of work across the partnership board to pull that together. The SEND strategy will need rewriting for the next iteration, because this one expires for 2025. So in the co-production of that strategy, we are using that logical framework approach. So we are going to start by what are we trying to achieve jointly as a partnership, what are our objectives, and then pull the strategy from that. So that's kind of where we are in terms of our KPIs. Communication, you're absolutely right in terms of accessibility. So that is all part of our work in terms of looking at how that's accessible, not just for children with SEND, but children or families with who haven't got English as their first language, who maybe aren't going to be accessing it online. We are working on parent packs. We've got the local offer, we've got the hubs, so that you can go in and sit with somebody to have the conversation. And within those hubs, obviously, there's all of our early years, our early help team and other agency colleagues, so it becomes a wraparound support. But really good point. In terms of that accessibility, that's a journey that we're on, and we will grow and develop those things as we move forward. In terms of, and I'll jump to the kind of local offer and what other LAs are doing, we absolutely are looking at what other LAs are doing and outstanding LAs. So Greenwich, for example, have got an outstanding SEND judgment. They're very good. So we look very much at what they are doing. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. If there's some really good practice, we are absolutely using that. In terms of co-production, there's a lot of really, really good co-production that takes place already. And I mean co-production rather than consultation. What we don't have, perhaps, is the strategy to ensure that it's consistent and the first thought in everything that we do. So you'll see, particularly with our young people, we're talking about a co-production charter. There is training on co-production that Medway Parents and Carers put on, that officers and health professionals and other staff engage with, so that we have an understanding of what co-production is. And there is a priority for the partnership board in terms of their governance, that is their first question: where is that co-production? And you know, where we do it well, and Ofsted picked up some examples of where there's some evidence of really, really good, strong co-production. Actually, that's some of our most effective work. So this isn't a tick box exercise. We genuinely do think that appropriate co-production is how I think we get things to work. I think that covered all of your questions.
Yeah, no, that's really positive. I mean, just on coming back on that co-production point, I think that's really positive to see. I think it would be good, particularly, you know, actually moving forward in some of the reports, if we could actually, you know, just a little snippet about how some of that's working would be really good across your part of the directorate, because I think it's just really interesting, particularly the way in which consultation and engagement with the community across all services within the council, but particularly within people services, is just really interesting, because I think it allows us to better embed and reflect the communities in which the council serves. So that's really positive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Leanna?
Hello, sorry to go back. I just wanted to just ask a question around the point of the EHC situation with the shortage of educational psychologists. So I do agree with Councillor Scott in the fact that some of our parents are paying £3,000 for private reports and diagnosis, and having been a Senko in Bexley and here, so I'm also grateful for you, Celia, by the way, so thank you very much. I think the varying quality of reports is quite worrying. My point really was just the experience I've had since I've been here 2 years now, and I am the SENCO and the head teacher, is just when we've put in the applications, the educational psychology reports often need to be recommissioned after the first application. But just a suggestion on my part that I know happens in other local authorities is if there has been a recent EP report within the previous year, they use that for the evidence. At the moment, that isn't happening, and some of ours have been bounced back saying they need a more up-to-date report. But arguably, if it's in the previous 12 months to the EHC, it's still relevant. So I just wanted to suggest that as probably a more accurate report basis for the assessment panel, as opposed to the bought-in reports that I think we're going to see more of. And we try and discourage our parents from that purely because obviously they are paying us for what's written on the piece of paper. And as the councillor said, we have affluent parents, we have parents on really, really low incomes on the edge of poverty, and we don't want it to be inequitable. And actually, for those that then use it to try and push through diagnosis and things like that, and then pay for independent diagnosis, we're then in a dangerous situation where children are getting diagnosis because they're bought, which I think is really dangerous. So I wouldn't want that to be advocated for the local authority.
Great question.
Thank you, and absolutely a really good suggestion. We do have a time limit on the reports, and I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what it is, but I will take that away. And actually, with your experience, I might come and have a separate conversation with you and pick your brain as well.
I would really love that. Thank you.
Thank you. Demola.
I think thank you for the report, first of all. And I know, Celia, you mentioned potential changes at how you provide funding for SEND children. I think what I'm worried about is, and sounds like most people are worried about, is how are we currently dealing with the long waiting list that we have with the EHCP? Because obviously it's kind of a twofold situation where you have the NHS where there's a long waiting list for diagnosis, so that's one fold, and then you have another fold where the EHCP plan, you've got either a shortage of educational psychologists or there's just a long waiting list for that. So I'm just wondering, for those parents who can't actually afford to go private, and for the parents who are probably on lower income, how do they get that support, especially where you have earlier children, and that's like the formative years, so it does greatly impact their education, and sets them up actually, and they're kind of playing catch up. So I'm just wondering how you're what are the short-term plans for that?
So there's 2 points to that question. I think in terms of our early years SEND team, we haven't reduced that. That is funded and goes out and supports early years providers, because it really is important that where a need is evident in early years, that it is diagnosed and that process is put in place and the support is put in place. And following on from that, we have got a few children now that are in, for want of a better word, assessment nursery places where they don't have an EHCP, but we can see actually that's the process, but in all reality they should be. And so they're going into special schools at an earlier stage without that EHCP to get the support to go through. In terms of the support for schools, so we commission quite a lot of support for schools around supporting children's needs. So we have, as I've mentioned already tonight, have that trauma-informed training for schools, which is a kind of more generic training. We have a programme of training for schools that they can log on to or go to around all the different need types and the pedagogy and the strategies that they can use in school, and that's free at the point of access. That is a free offer for schools. We also have an outreach support, so if there is a particular child where they want advice and guidance, then an advisor from a special school comes out and can provide that advice and guidance for that young person. We have been topping up SEND notional budget for schools with a higher proportion of children with the HCPs in, and that's why we're looking just to flip that now, because actually they might have a high proportion but they're still on the waiting list. So we are doing that quickly this term so that from September we can get the applications in before, we can process them over the summer, and then from September, if there's provision maps and top-up funding that can go in from that point, they'll be ready for when they land in September.
Just had a quick follow-up. So just in regards to nurseries, and the reason I'm focusing on that is because sometimes within nurseries where children are spending quite a bit of time, especially where they have working parents who are probably working 7 to 7, so they're sometimes in a better position to pick up certain things that may be considered SEND, and where it's not being picked up there, and then they're going into school and then it's being picked up there. I'm just wondering what is being done to educate, you know, nursery settings, early years, before they get to school, so we're kind of having those EHCP plans in place earlier, or some sort of like support, and that way they're not working from a later stage in terms of education, where they're going into reception or year 1 and not prepared.
So we do have a whole range of training for early years providers, which is also provided free by our early years SEND team, about identifying need. The challenges come with our younger children, that if it isn't a very obvious and clearly defined or diagnosed need that maybe was from birth, then that graduated approach, that plan do review, is it a developmental delay, but actually they would be able to cope in a mainstream school with additional provision. So we absolutely move very quickly on those children that have very clear needs and clear diagnosis, but where it's perhaps not as simple as that and it's a bit more complex, we deliberately stagger it, because actually we don't want to be saying to a very young child, you're not right in that school, you need to go in this school, and you set their whole trajectory up like that. And actually, as we know, young children change monthly, don't they, over a period of time. So it's a fine balance that we have to find for young children. But the early years SEND team, which is why we've left that team, absolutely officers working with our providers, because they can advise and support, and they're experienced in what they see. Thank you.
Could you just hold it, because Liz has been waiting for a very long time.
I don't mind if Mark's comment is relevant to that.
Okay, courteous, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. With the comment, my wife's role in her nursery chain, she works for one of the big ones, and I know, although she's out of our area, I know that they've got the similar roles in this area as well. Her role is the equivalent of a SENCO in a school. So they are identifying, they are working, and part of the stuff is they work with their local authorities, and they also, when they're going to their primary schools, they work very closely with the schools where they're going to as well. So there is a full support, although they try and allow them time to, if it's just a late development, there is all action is always going into place. My wife constantly spends 2 to 3 hours a night completing these reports, and this is a lot more than she used to do 5 or 6 years ago. So you are correct in it's increasing at a lower age as well, but it is being identified.
Thank you. Liz, then Lisa, quickly.
Thanks, Jo. And yeah, thanks very much for this report. And it's really good to see these sort of focused areas of improvement, because that's certainly the way we can go forward to making things better. And I just wanted to sort of, you know, touch on the co-production a bit more and just sort of dig down into that, because with the EHCPs, either if they're sort of in the process or a child's already got one, there's often I'm finding sort of delays with it. It might be sort of already addressed that a child needs a certain support or provision, but there's delay because of who funds that provision. So whether it's education or health or social care. And I'm just wondering sort of, you know, how can that be addressed? And, you know, is there a responsible professional that sort of oversees that to ensure that it's not just being passed from one department to the other and the delay sort of goes on and on? And then sort of following on from that, where you've got a child, you know, I had someone come to me sort of several years ago, and I'm hoping perhaps things have improved, but also with my own experience, that if you've got a child with a life-limiting condition, you know, these obviously delays are precious for any child because you're only a child for a certain length of time, but when you've got a child with a life-limiting condition, it's even more precious, and we need to ensure that we move at pace to ensure that child gets the right support and provision at the right time. So just, you know, how can those processes be speeded up? You know, I appreciate there's lots of panels and things to go through, but, you know, for the child and for the family, it's really important that those that need is addressed as quickly as possible. You know, is it possible that if it's agreed that that need is there, and what's going to be provided, that it can be put in place and the arguing or discussion comes afterwards about the funding? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. They're interesting points because in terms of where our delays are, we've not heard that particular complaint about the delay to funding. The funding is clearly, or the responsibility for the funding is in the EHCP in terms of which section the need is, etc. There are obviously a small number of children where that is quite complex, and then that does go to a complex case panel, and we'll look at how that's funded and who funds which part, and they are very complex needs that need actually tripart funding from health, social care and education. The majority, though, are funded, and then we argue afterwards about who's paying it. So I'd be quite interested if you've got specific cases that you want to send to me to have a look at, because we haven't had that come through particularly as a concern.
Yeah, I think just following on from that, it was a historic issue. I think we're all quite aware now the SEND Code of Practice, and in there it states that if it educates or trains, it's to be funded by education. So I think there's quite some legal clear guidance that you have to follow. I think my point was just coming back to the those parents who feel they have no other option than to pay for the diagnosis pathway, and I think we have to be very careful as a committee to put that in the right way, because I think that can be quite offensive, and I don't think anything's meant by that, but I think we need to be careful of that, in the fact that no parent wants a diagnosis for their child. You know, it's a really hard thing, and some parents just feel they have no other option to follow that route to get that support for that child, and I think that is what we need to be working on, and how we can stop that from happening, and how we can support them families earlier on and get that early kind of identification through.
Thank you.
Yes, just to say, Lisa, I absolutely agree, and you know, parents do things that are in the best interest of their children, as we all would, and nobody's suggesting that that otherwise that is the case. Unfortunately, it's sad that some parents have had to get to that point because their young people aren't getting it, and we go back to the disparity and equality where some parents have more resource to do that than others don't. So the sooner we can get the system financially stable and working, the better it is for everybody.
Wayne, have you got your hand up, or have you been deprived of a sky dish like Sunak?
No, I do this time have something which actually follows on. Oh, sorry. It isn't so much of a query, but it's a point with regards to those parents who are able to pay privately. They shouldn't be stigmatised, because unfortunately the waiting lists are so long. I think in Medway alone, to get a diagnosis report, we're looking at somewhere in the region of 4 years. And the importance of parents to be able to get their children seen and diagnosed at an early stage, because by having that delay, it's going to really impact on their entire educational life. If they're delayed now, they need those opportunities to have the SEND provisions given to them at that stage. And as I say, we're saying that there is a disparity. Some can pay, some can't. But the issue is that we should try our damnedest to make sure that every child or every parent whose children may be on that spectrum are seen as soon as possible rather than having a 4-year delay.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, but our young people, and actually Liz in the past, in terms of use of hospice use, we know that it's underused by the most deprived in society. And page 55 of Celia's own report, B, developing more partnership, working to lift barriers. And that's what we need to do. And we can't create a level playing field with the haves playing and the have-nots being left behind, because that's not a meritocracy. That's not what the 5th richest nation in the world should be doing. Thanks. Leah.
So I wondered how, it's not really in the report very clearly, I don't know if that's because Ofsted didn't mention it, but how are we ensuring that we're as aspirational as we can be when we talk about it for care leavers? I'm not sure that we're always aspirational for children with SEN, because so often when we discuss the different settings that they should be at, it's all about who's best placed to manage their behaviour, as opposed to where is the best place for this child to be to get the very best out of them and the best outcomes for them in adulthood. So I just wondered what we're doing about that.
So you're right, Ofsted, that wasn't one of their recommendations, but that is in our SEN strategy in terms of outcomes for children and young people. And you're right, if we look at academic outcomes, they are below their peers nationally, similarly to other children in Medway within our schools. So the kind of work around our school provision. And when I say our school provision, I'm talking significantly about our independent school provision. We have a really robust quality assurance framework now that's not just a social care framework, but actually Rebecca and her team do an education, so they're looking at the quality of education, and particularly in terms of the commissioning team, our contracts, how to hold them to account, how to monitor the KPIs, because as you're saying, I was speaking to parents whose children were in an independent schools doing 3 GCSEs, 4 GCSEs, and actually had aspirations to go on and do A-levels and unis, but we'd stopped that because they were in certain provisions. So there is a lot of work within the strategy that's about developing the right provision, so managing our independent market, developing our post-16 provision. So for those that are not able to access that higher level, we've got a dearth of entry level, level 1, level 2 provision post-16. Our post-16 strategy is addressing that and developing and growing that provision, which not only supports some of our care leavers, but particularly our children with SEND, where they end up neat. So it is very much within our broader SEND strategy and action plan as well.
Okay, Vice Chair, thank you.
So I move that the committee notes the findings of the February 2024 Joint Area Inspection and the Joint Area Improvement Plan, co-produced by the Joint Area SEND Partnership, which includes health, social care, education and Medway parents and carers, and that future reports will include acronym definitions and a glossary.
Okay, is that seconded? And agreed? Thank you. Item 9, Council Planned Performance Monitoring and Strategic Risk Summary. I think it was quite explicit in the report, so we'll go straight to questions if I may. Any questions? Oh.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions and then one point which I actually require a bit of clarification on. Firstly, I do feel I want to express a heartfelt thanks to the midwifery team at Medway Hospital, past and present, but also the tremendous job that Dr. So and his team do at the Oliver Fisher, which is huge, knowing personally firsthand how much they do. In the report, page 76, it states that the number of women breastfeeding within 48 hours of childbirth is reducing and now stands at 67.33%, which sadly is below the national average. It's noted that there was an infant feeding strategy group which met in May in ways to improve this. But what is being done to increase the uptake of mothers breastfeeding, given the importance and the need to breastfeed, and being aware that some of mothers are simply unable to breastfeed? And whilst we're focusing on ensuring that we give these levels an increase, obviously there are those mothers that can't breastfeed, and we need to try to avoid as much as possible to give them some kind of stigmatization or make them feel as though they're failing as mothers in those first 48 hours because they can't breastfeed. The second point is in relation to the healthy eating, and within the report it states that there's going to be costs of advertising of healthy eating. Now, I'd like to know where those funds are coming from, given that the administration has said we're on the verge of bankruptcy and everything else pretty much. So I'd like to see where that money is coming from. Clarification with regards to the increase on the number of children on the protection plans, given that it's a rise of 7% from Q3, and it continues to rise. And in the report it says that it increased as of February, but from my review of the pie chart, bar graph, sorry, which is on page 86, it looks as though it also increased in March as well. So just hoping that we can get some kind of clarity as to why there is this increase of 7%. And then on the ILAC 0.5, how long before we attain the target level of 65%, noting that we're currently down at 54%, which is really, really quite low, and it's been its lowest for quite some period of time.
Could I just sort of say that obviously with due respect, Wayne, you have read the comments underneath which do answer one or two of your points, I feel, but I was, and I'm a bit remiss, and Liz will know this, we've been on this committee for about half a decade, and I think some of these targets might be a bit historical for when we were in category, and possibly, I would imagine that when Celia and people have a full complement on their team, that we will be reviewing this, because these were targets from when we were inadequate as well. But, there's no stigmatising people that can't breastfeed. For example, if you've got inverted nipples, but we do know that breast is best, and we are really, and that's what we had Sure Start centres to do and health visitors to do, and also other associations to encourage, but we should not be stigmatising anybody.
But with all due respect, you say the report does answer that question. The report actually states that it was being discussed, so what's coming of it, and nevertheless, the number of new mothers who are breastfeeding within those 48 hours is reducing. And I'm just trying to seek the clarification, because you say it is detailed in the report, but it's not. And I'm just trying to see what it is that you're doing in order to ensure, because I agree with you that breast is best, but I'm just hoping to find out what came of the infant feeding strategy group meeting which met in May, in order to enhance that and seeing what the team, and I've started off by saying I know how amazing the midwifery team and say Dr. So's team do at Medway Hospital. So I'm just agreeing that breast is best for newborn children, but we're on a decline, and I want to know what we're doing to make sure we're going back up rather than descending. That was all.
Thank you, and thank you, Wayne. And I think, so apologies this evening, we don't have anybody from Public Health with us, so you're...
You're pointing over
I
there.
think James can answer a bit
Oh,
of
can
it,
you
but
answer
I'm
that,
happy
James?
to take back everything and get a proper response from the team for you.
So I think on the forward plan, which we're on as well, the infant feeding strategy is either at the next meeting or the meeting after, and sort of will be updated in due course. So I wasn't at the May meeting to update you on that. I think with regards to the target, I mean, these are long-running national targets around the 70%. It should be worth noting, and Councillor Turpin will certainly know because we've been on lots of groups around this over the years, the initiation one isn't always the best indicator of success, because quite often if things go well in hospital, a parent and child can be discharged within 24 hours. So it's judged on literally that initial, have we seen them latch or not. The really important marker on that, and I was having a quick look for the current stats and I can't find them, but we will come back to that, is around the continuation rates, which sort of comes into kind of some of Glenn and Julia's world around actually that point in time where midwifery still have the family, health visitors are picking up the family, and have they sort of continued that along the line. So that's the real indicator of understanding around, you know, have parents done it more than once, and does it go on? So I haven't got the details of that May meeting, but as I say, I know it's on the forward plan to come forward as a, you know, as a strategy. And I just wanted to note that actually that initiation rate often means that there's a lower complexity in some of the families that are going through midwifery, which means they are discharged quite quickly, and so there isn't really that time for interventions or really measuring that. So it's a complex picture.
Okay, so in respect of the child protection plans, I think what the report shares is that there was a peak in February, and what we've seen is a decrease in that peak. So whilst you're saying it still seems to be on the incline, it's a slight incline, which we're always going to see with the work that we're doing in children's, particularly at this moment in time when we're really looking to ensure that children are on the right plans. So we're reviewing all our child in need work, all our child protection work. We'll have a number of children that are stepping down from orders from court, which may progress onto child protection and child in need. So there is fluctuation at the moment, which is evident in the report. Was it ILACS 4 or ILACS 5?
It was on page 86.
85, 86.
Yeah, 85, 86 of the report. Yeah.
So can I just clarify, it's percentage of children with long-term fostering as a plan where the child carer has an agreed for the placement, is that the one?
That's the one, correct,
okay,
yes.
We've been doing a lot of work around our permanency plans, and it links to our permanency and stability. Some of the work that we need to continue to progress is around recording and ensuring that we are assigning the correct codes. In the report, you'll see that it does acknowledge that we've now got a permanency dashboard, which enables us to track on a more regular basis. So on a weekly basis, we can look at the dashboard. We've now very recently appointed a permanency worker who we're hoping is going to be able to bring some more focus to that work and actually do some targeted work around those young children and young people that may be at risk of placement moves. It's also going to be enable us to ensure that actually that we are working and getting our reports to our fostering panel on a timely basis. I can only hope. We're taking a number of actions because, yes, we agree that that's, not where we would want to be. I think my caveat to that, and it's not an excuse, and we are not resting and saying, oh, it's because of the challenges nationally around placement markets and that. We're actually pushing ourselves and saying, well, what can we do? But there are challenges nationally around placement and permanency and stability for children in care.
Alex, the work that you and your team do is absolutely fantastic, but as I would and you've just already responded to that more than adequately, is the work that you are currently doing is trying to get that back up, which is where we need to be. So thank you.
Thank you. Liz.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the breastfeeding one, and thanks, James, for your response. And I think it is kind of always been a frustrating KPI because it's something that we don't actually have much influence over, I think. So I'm just, I mean, how can that be changed? Can we be looking at a KPI where where it's long-term breastfeeding rather than this initiation? I mean, I know we do have some input because I think the work that peer supporters do is not just with new mums. They do work with expectant mums as well. So there is some input there that we have. But yeah, just to sort of see whether we can actually look at the long-term, because it might be that, mums unable to breastfeed in hospital, but then with the support of midwives or peer supporters or whatever, pick it up later on. It's not a case of if you don't succeed in 48 hours, that's it. That's the end of the journey. It's definitely not. And it can be taken up later. So it'd be good to sort of see a change in how we report that. And just on some of the other sort of the reds in the report, because I think what I'm looking at is the alarming ones where it's, we've got red where it's improving, but we've got reds where things are getting worse. So that's what's really worrying. And I think that, school performance is one, and the attainment 8 score as well. So just sort of what work we're doing there. I was just trying to find the audit one. I'm struggling to find it again now, so I don't know if anyone can, I'll keep looking, but unless anyone can point me towards that. Thank you. Thank you.
Are you going for that?
Thank you. The challenges around school performance are, as we've discussed, these aren't updated because they're updated with the exam data, so the national data that comes out. The Medway Education Partnership has this as priorities, as do all of our schools and the head teacher groups, and the remit of the regional group and the teaching schools around improving those outcomes with our academy schools, so things like delivering maths mastery, etc., which we had that more detailed discussion around the school performance report, which I know we didn't have the regional director present in. So those are kind of static until we get the next outcome of exam results that we can feed into it.
In respect of ILAC 7, it's been well talked about here before. I think it's an aspirational target for us as children's services. I think what the actions share and the data shares is actually we are seeing improvements in those that are being marked as required improvement and good, and we're seeing a decline in those that are inadequate. So we want to push that further, so we lower those numbers that are requires improvement and we move into more audits becoming good and then moving into outstanding, which is our aspiration. So I think the conversation has always been 80% is a high target for us as children's service, but it is our aspiration to get there.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's certainly good to see, that the trend is improving. I think, we still look at that 41% being, even with, I appreciate the target is high, but 41% does seem very low as well. But, do we have any sort of time frames? Because I know when we do discuss this, it is always said that this is a long-term goal, but I think it's just understanding what long-term means,
I think it's embedding of that good practice within the service, and one of the things we talk about is retention of our staff. So we are recruiting more staff, and it's about us keeping them. So by keeping them, we will be able to get that consistency across the services in respect of practice. And I think it's at that point we'll start to see a kind of continued incline nearer towards that 80%. So in respect of timeframes, I don't think Leanne, if she was here, would be expecting me to say that, but I think it's definitely our aspiration to move nearer that 80%.
Okay, thank you. We're running out of time, so can I ask that questions are succinct, please? Mark and Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fully aware that this report is to do with the last financial year's period, and we've since voted in a new council plan performance monitoring report. But looking at some of the figures, the first thing we want to come in on page 95, CA13, it's a green marker, does look great, looks improving, but is that really a true reflection, or should we really be reporting this on a rolling annual basis? Because with it being upheld only and going from the process of the original exclusion to the appeals could take more than a quarter. So the figures will always be moving. So yeah, it looks great now, but next month with a lot of these 37 that remain to be concluded, suddenly all go, yep, they're all upheld. And then we're looking at a really bad red. So it wouldn't give a true reflection of what's happening over a period of time. I know it's outside the remit because with regards to the secondary schools judged good or better, and that only one of the secondary schools in Medway is maintained, and that school is good. But I just would like to know what involvement with the two inadequate schools the education team have. With regards to the percentage who achieve, it's really good to see that the maintained schools are 7 percentage points on average above. So obviously our schools team for the maintained schools is doing something really well. Is there any way we can get the academies on board to that structure? I did look at some of the scores. A school that I know that used to struggle is Elaine. Last year they scored 69%. That's amazing. So whatever they're doing now, can we try and get that out to some of the other schools? But also I do know, being a school governor, that schools know what year is going to be good and what year is going to be bad. It does come into children, if they've got more children with special educational needs, if they've got more children within that school year from disadvantaged backgrounds, not to do with SEND, so our travelling community, they're not always in school. So some years they get a lot more because they're staying more local, and some years they're moving on again. And they know that it's going to be, and that at the primary school, a lot of the primary schools look at the attainment 8, but we don't actually record that on our report, but we do it for the secondary schools. Because that's a more reflection of how our pupils moved throughout the school years, and it takes out everything else on the movement. So potentially could look, hopefully, I've not been involved in what the new targets are, but can we potentially have a figure on that for primary, and not just on the actual results, because I think the results is a bit hit and miss to what the cohort is for that year per school. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the exclusion data, absolutely it does fluctuate. We can only publish upheld results in this, and it fluctuates through the year. The annual schools performance report, which we brought forward to January, has a lot more detail in terms of looking at the whole year's performance and comparing it to national for a number of these education measures, actually, because it's quite difficult to do it in this quarterly way. But we have got a reduction in permanent exclusions, but you're right, it fluctuates, and our inclusions team do a lot of work to prevent exclusions and work with schools to find alternatives. In terms of the two inadequate secondaries, we were very heavily involved in terms of when they went inadequate and helping support them in developing their action plan. They are academies, they were brokered by the regional director, and that improvement is absolutely the responsibility of the Academy Trust that took over. But in more general terms, as I talked earlier about our risk assessment and our categorisation of schools, so we use the information that we have about schools, we use complaints, we use attendance at different forums, we use financial data, and we RAG rate our schools, whether they're academies or not, and we offer support. But in terms of an academy, they don't have to take that support up. In terms of local authority schools, we're very much involved, and Rebecca and what was our school improvement team are out there supporting and really bringing that forward. In terms of outcomes, so Attainment 8 refers to the Attainment 8 Key Stage 4, 8 best GCSEs within buckets. That's not a measure at primary. So I'm not sure what you're referring to, but in terms of looking at that, the school's performance report, which comes to this board, goes through the measures in each of the key stages and gives the comparisons and the narrative around them. So it's probably better to have that and have that conversation in more detail there, because there isn't that measure in primary. And I'm happy to send you that, Mark, so that you can have a look at that, obviously, within your new role anyway.
Okay, quick question, Adrian, please.
Yes, I'll try and do it as quick as possible. Fun enough, I picked the same CA13 that Mark does, but the bit that I'm concerned about is the last bullet point, that 3 schools are accounting for 45% of the total exclusions in Medway. So something's going wrong in those 3 schools. I just wondered what extra support we're putting in to try and remedy that, because the thought occurs to me, Alex quite rightfully highlighted that children who've been in care start off with a big barrier to get over. They're more likely to end up in the criminal justice system, and that but sort of thing will equally apply for children who are missing school.
Thank you. So, as I said, obviously one of those is local authority maintained, and we have a much greater presence and support within that school. In actual fact, though, all 3 of those schools do work with us, work with our inclusion teams, and have broader conversations around their inclusion and how that's working. And actually, all 3 of those schools are on an improvement journey. And if you look, this is historic. So actually, all 3 of those have improved on that date.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair?
So I move that the committee has to consider the Q4 2023-24 performance against the measures used to monitor progress against the Council's priorities, and that the committee notes the 2023-24 strategic risk summary, Appendix 2.
Is that seconded? Thank you. Agreed? Thank you. Item 10, the work programme. Yeah, you're okay.
I'm going to take the report as read, but I will ask members to please respond to the recommendations in the report, namely about whether or not we would want to take the local plan, and also about suggestions of topics that you would like to look into for the 24-25 cycle of meetings. I did send an email about it a little while ago, just to give members time to think about it. Yeah.
Okay, any members? Adrian?
On the local plan, I think, I know that this is a very big committee, and certainly when we get into the theme meetings, it is very detailed. But I think we should have an input for the local plan, because so much in that local plan does bear on our children and young people. The provision of schools, open spaces, and all this. They're all vital, for our young people and children. So I think we should have an input and make sure that those policies are child-friendly.
Thank you, Adrian. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. All I was thinking is that I don't know what's been on previous years, but looking down, it's not been listed on there. But with election going on at the moment and talking to young people, one of the biggest issues to come up of our younger generation is mental health and the support they're getting in schools. I just wondered, not straight away, but potentially we could look at how what support is out there and how easy it is for our young people. Since the pandemic, the amount of children with anxiety at school has gone through the roof, and I think that's really something we should be looking at, because that's affecting across the board for all children. So I think that's something that really should look at. Thank you.
Okay, Celia.
Yeah, we can look at bringing all that together and bringing a report to the committee on that.
Liz?
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, can I just second Adrian's suggestion with regards to the local plan? I mean, I was actually at the meeting on the 11th of January. I'm not sure why I didn't bring it up then, because
anybody brought it up at that meeting.
I know, that somehow kind of went over my head, I think, because it was discussed at the Regen pre-agenda meeting, and I was kind of saying, why did the children and young people not want to have this included? And then they sort of brought my attention to the fact that it was discussed at that 11th of January meeting. So apologies for not raising it at that meeting, because I'm pretty sure I was present. But yeah, I think it's important that we shouldn't have this ONS miss out on it. I think we should have it come forward.
Yeah, I think that's agreed by everybody. Also, I just wondered if we could, linked with the mental health and anxiety, perhaps consider the powerful, in terms of strengthening family, maybe a report on MPAC, which is the action and addiction, moving parents and children forward together, if that could kind of tie in with that. And then the other thing my team are I think we all should be concerned about, but there's been a lot of press about dolls in terms of and, as an experienced foster carer, I know that's usually when people have been in care and, maybe come at a foster care with a knife or have personality disorders. But I'd really like to know how many we have, and if they're local or, and if they aren't local, say they're up in Scotland, and they're placed for their safety or someone else's safety there, how do they get that connection back to Medway or with a person they feel safe with, or no?
I'm happy for any other suggestions to be sent to me outside of the meeting.
Okay, well, I think we've had a long meeting. Thank you all. If there's anything else. Okay, meeting closed. Thanks. Oh, sorry, I forgot to... I so want my bed. Apologies, Leah, I left your bit out.
I just nodded and closed the papers as well. So I move that the committee notes the report and agree the work programme as set out in Appendix 1 to the report, subject to accepting the proposed changes outlined in italic text on Appendix 1. And that we have also agreed to look at the local plan, mental health, MPAC and dolls, and that any other suggestions will be sent to Stephanie.
Stephanie, thank you. Is that seconded? And agreed? Thank you all. Good night.